We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The Supreme Court is off to the races with a brand new term and even a new face. What are the big cases to watch this year, and will this season be as politically contentious as the last? Well, we've asked Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, host of the Uprising podcast, and general fount of knowledge on all things constitutional, Mr. Scott DeCosenza, to join us for a special segment examining the big SCOTUS cases. Thanks for coming in, Scott.
Cheers, Mark.
So, Scott, last session we saw gun rights strongly reiterated via Bruin versus New York State Rifle and Pistol Association. We also saw Roe v. Wade sent back to the states. Now, both of these have had and are having huge implications for politics in America. Are there any cases coming up in this brand new session of a similar magnitude?
Well, I think guns and abortion are probably, I don't think it does get bigger than that.
So the second season's not as good as the first.
Well,
it's the way of all television shows and Supreme Court terms,
almost
right?
all. There are the exceptions to the rule. Narcos, I think, is one perhaps, and there may be others out there. There are, affirmative action in higher education and perhaps writ large affirmative action in other places is potentially on the chopping block. The affirmative action in higher education is definitely up before the court. What I mean is, could that expand out and, in fact, be as impactful as the gun cases or the abortion cases? Perhaps, Mark. If the Supreme Court decides finally to end racial segregation, quote unquote, a positive racial segregation and discrimination. So right now, you're not allowed to discriminate against a person of color in favor of, for instance, white people, but you're absolutely able to discriminate against whites and especially Asians in the higher education example in favor of black and brown people.
So what is the case here that's before the court? Is it's the universities representing Asian students, right? Asian American students?
Yeah, well, it's just about whether or not they can use race to discriminate in a positive way to kind of buoy the fortunes of, black and brown people who would go to a really great, perhaps non-elite college. That's sort of a joke because, it's not like there's somebody who's never getting a chance in life who, is being elevated to, high-end status. It's people are basically just elevated one level or so above of where they might be in any case.
Okay, what's the name of this case that we're looking at?
There are two cases consolidated on the affirmative action case. One is out of North Carolina and one is out of Harvard. And the reason why they kind of took both and so they combined them and then split them. And the reason is it's a function of Ketanji Brown Jackson being a Harvard director of sorts. I forget what program she was a director of, but she would have a conflict of interest if it was the Harvard case. But even though the identical issue is presented in another case, she can rule on that without the conflict being present. And so it's sort of a trick of wording rather than anything,
It's an illusion, not a trick.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Scott, if the court rules, how would they rule that essentially affirmative action for positive discrimination is at an end? How could that manifest
It's difficult
itself?
for me to describe without kind of sounding perhaps contemptuous or unappreciative of the nuance of the liberals' argument. But essentially, they argue that even though the Civil Rights Act of all our civil rights acts that prevent discrimination on the basis of race don't say, but it's okay if you want to remediate earlier discrimination by now discriminating against somebody who you think it's okay to discriminate. They don't say those things. That's just an invented law by the justices on the Supreme Court who have said that, and especially this is the case in higher education, it's perfectly
You're talking about
fine.
previous justices on the Supreme Court in earlier cases, right?
That's exactly right.
Yep.
Excuse me. So the Supreme Court case we're talking about now that's going to be heard has not yet been presented for oral argument before the court. But previous affirmative action cases, when they were ruled upon, the court basically said it's okay to discriminate against whites and Asians. It's okay to discriminate in favor of preferred black and brown people against those other and use race as a basis for that discrimination. They just say that it's okay because of it's redressing past discrimination. Now, why that makes it okay, Mark, in our constitutional scheme, even though it goes against the plain language of the Civil Rights Act, I don't understand it, but that is what our law is presently.
I think this is likely to be one of the most contentious cases of the decade, really, Scott, because it's the kind of thing that people will talk about. I believe in America you say it around the office water cooler, if they dare speak about it at all. In that
there you go,
case.
right?
So because I think it Sandra Day O'Connor who
it is. I know where you're going, and that's perfectly
who
right
said
quote.
that there should be. I don't remember the exact quote here, but it's essentially that at some point affirmative action will have to stop because the redress will have been redressed. The wrongs will have been redressed.
She mused that, gee, perhaps in 25 years, we could readdress the issue of allowing discrimination against unfavored races. And now mostly that's whites and Asians, and in favor of, favored races. And she then actually went on after her term as a justice and made sure to qualify that to say, 25 was just the soonest time when I thought that would take place. Let's not get ahead of ourselves and think it might even be quicker than that,
Might even be quicker. Let's just put this in perspective. How long ago did she say this?
Mark, that was in 2003 in the Grutter v. Bollinger case.
Okay, so we still got 6 years, according to her template, for this to carry on.
Let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Absolutely. Let's not get too far ahead.
There are many Asians who need to be discriminated against in the meantime.
Well, so here's the thing with this particular form of positive discrimination, as they call it. People are being shuffled, and it's not as though somebody with no chance of going to university is now getting a place at one of the top Ivy League schools. It's a question of them going up one layer, as it were. So it's a very good school to an Ivy League school. But what happens to the students who are denied a place based on their work ethic, their past performance in different exams? Now, surely they're going one echelon down. Now, does that impact them financially, for their life chances, for their children's life chances? Presumably it would.
Absolutely it does. It does in, I'm kind of an expert about it just in the sense of law school, being a person who's attended it and looked at the different salary projections, and the people who graduate from the elite schools make a lot more money than the people who don't graduate from the elite schools, as you might imagine. It stands to reason this would be true for other disciplines as well. And the mass of people that are being pushed out of the elite, they are, they're really suffering. And, it's funny because you talked about how this often basically elevates people to sort of like one level, right? Well, I think that's probably true for the middling section, but for the elite, it's probably the most skewed. And what I mean by that is at the lower level, somebody maybe wouldn't get into college at all, who's now at a community college, there wasn't that much of a boost up for a person like that. But to get the sufficient quantity of the highly desirous, you can just think of a person who is a black female in a engineering program. Okay. The vacuum that engineering program has for black or trans women of color. Okay. There are almost none there. It's first of all, it's mostly male, and it skews, Asian, the engineering, and maths. Right. And it's like the farthest away you get from that demographically. So the more you get female, and then the more you get into persons of color, the fewer applicants there are naturally for those positions. So there's a greater vacuum pull then to lift people up from the unqualified ranks. Let's recall that that's what this is about. It's about people who otherwise do not qualify for the position except for the color of their skin. And so I think it also robs us, Mark, finally, of having the best people be pushed to create their best. Society really does benefit from this.
Well, it's not as though it's happening in medical school, is it, Scott?
Yeah, right.
Oh, hang on. Now, Obviously, I know you hate to get out your crystal ball on this, Scott, because there's no way to really tell, right? They haven't heard arguments. We don't know where people are going to jump. But have any of the justices on the bench ever made comments that would indicate that they're willing to go one way or the other?
Oh, well, yes. Mark Justice Thomas was on the bench in the Bollinger case where Sandra Day O'Connor lectured him that they would just need 25 more years to discriminate in favor of blacks.
Just 25 years to flatten the curve, right?
He disagreed then, and presumably he will disagree again. And, you know, for the crystal ball status, some cases are sort of easier than others to sort of predict. And I do predict that really all the conservative justices are with the person. And Roberts, let's say it's a 5 to 4 to 1, or excuse me, 5 to 3 to 1 court. And what I mean by that is 5 conservative justices, 3 lefty justices, and Justice Roberts on the end there. So, but I believe there will be 5 votes to overturn it, and I think that's going to be great that people aren't judged by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. Something that I was, obviously taught by liberals.
Absolutely. Now, coming up after this short break, we're back with Scott discussing the other big stories of the week that impact your rights and your liberties. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.